So yeah, back to the whole lawsuit thing. So they sue him. Steam preemptively takes them off, even though their argument is that it hasn't been litigated in court, and that they're being harmed as a business because they're unable to sell their product. So they're counterclaiming, saying, "Hey, this hasn't been sussed out yet. You guys can't just pull us off like that. Like this is harming our business." So they submitted an appeal to the court, the same court where the copyright claim was filed, saying you have to let us on Steam until this has been negated. Like you haven't proven that we've copyrighted your code, and pulling the game off, hurts us as a company. You're causing harm with these false allegations. And that appeal is supposed to be litigated in court tomorrow. So if that goes well, then tomorrow you might see that this game is viable again. And if it is, then, there might be a good chance that we'll come back and start playing it. Especially because Mortal Online has been very, very difficult to get into so far. You can sit in a queue for, 12 hours, 24 hours. It doesn't tell you your position in the queue. There's some suspicion about whether or not the queue is even first in, first out. So Mortal, it's a brand new launched game. It launched 2-3 days ago, and of course, with any game, they always have queue issues and login issues. Every game has it. New World did, Arc-Age did, Black Desert did. Name me a game that didn't. People are gonna bitch. It's what they do. Whatever, right? Mortal is an indie company. They have a team of 30 developers total. So I give them leeway. What New World did, they threw 40 servers at the game because they had more hype than they realized and couldn't handle, and they had bad queues. Well, one, Mortal's on a super server, so you can't just throw servers at it. Two, they're not the biggest, most wealthy company on the fucking planet. Right? So, it's okay. I expect them to take a couple weeks to figure that stuff out. I ain't gonna burn any bridges just because of that. I'll keep playing the game. Especially because it's a beautiful sandbox, and it's full loot, full PvP, open world housing. It checks every single box of whatever I could possibly hope for in an MMO. I do have some pipe dreams, some visionary ideals of what an even better game would be if I could build one myself. But those ideals are things that have never existed on any game ever. Like, I want to have a game where the animals themselves give birth, and that's how they spawn. They don't just randomly reappear whenever they get killed like every other game on the planet does. I want, when a tree gets chopped down, I want that tree to stay dead. And I want trees to, pop up as little sprouts around other more mature trees, just like they would in the real world. And I want a region of the map that's forest, a region of the map that's desert, all these different biomes with access to different resources. And I want it to where if you overfarm the trees, then, the forest is going to be cut down, and it's going to take a while for it to grow back. So it kind of forces the players to manage the resources and cultivate them, right? If you're a big guild of woodsmen who specialize in crafting bows and selling them and taking them, down south to be sold at the desert where there's scarcity of wood and they can't get a hold of that stuff, then you might want to put up a fence and maybe some guard towers. And I would love to have a game that has an NPC system like Mo does too, so where you could put NPC guards in those towers. And I also want, open world full loot PvP like Mortal does. My perfect game would basically be a hybrid of this game and Mortal. Only the scarcity of resources, like in this game, you'll notice you got the desert over here, you got the mountains over here, down here you got the forest, you got the jungle. Well, guess what? Is there anywhere where you can't chop a tree? No. When it comes to higher end resources, yeah, you can only get black iron and sulfur over here, and you can only get meteoric iron in the snowy mountains, and down here is where you get jade, and yeah, they have scarcity of higher end resources, but I want a game where all of the resources function that way. And then layering on top of that the fact that, if flax grows naturally out in the world somewhere, I want you to be able to harvest it, have flax seeds. I want you to be able to plant your own crops. I want you to be able to plant your own trees, right? So If you chop down a tree, maybe you get the wood and then you get some seeds out of it too. So if somebody mows down the whole forest, yeah, they're not the forest isn't going to grow back naturally because there's no trees out there for them to grow from. But now there's an abundance of seeds all over the place that can be planted to put new trees down, right? So if you become the guild that is focusing on wood as your resource, and you've got crafters making bows, and you're taking them down to the desert where there's no wood available, and then some other small guild comes in and starts harassing your resources, maybe they poke a hole in your fence and they come in and they harvest your trees, and they're stealing these resources that you've locked down and you've tried to, restrict the rest of the world from having access to. Well, what do? Do you go attack that little guild and potentially turn criminal and turn red yourself? Well, hey, they're an agitator, they're annoying, but you don't necessarily want to become a criminal. So maybe you go find an actual red guild and hire them as mercenaries and say, hey, we're a big guild, we're defensible, you guys are kind of a small group of brigands, you like to PK caravans and stuff like that. Well, we have a blue in our area that's messing with us and we want them gone, so we're going to pay you to go wipe out their base. I want a game that has a healthy mix of politics and combat and PvP, and I think having localized scarce resources is a good way to do that. Where, maybe down here in the jungle, you have all kinds of rare, exotic, poisonous / unique plants that can contribute to making a wide variety of potions and alchemy and stuff like that. And maybe there's an abundance of clay in the swamp. It's a very muddy place, right? So maybe you can make a clay vial, but that clay vial isn't going to keep your potion from, becoming oxidized, right? So maybe that potion only has a shelf life of, 24 hours in game, which would be, 4 hours or 2 hours in real world, and then it's gone, right? But up in the desert, people can just grab a shovel and pull sand right out of the ground, and they can melt that sand into glass, right? And make vials. And if they sell that to the people down in the jungle that are making potions, well, when you put that potion in a glass vial, since it's, so much more airtight and secure, that potion now lasts a month instead of a day. So it enables them to make that potion last long enough that they can sell it on the open market and have somebody still expect to buy it. Whereas a potion that's 24 hours, that's good enough for you to maybe set up for yourself, right? Because if 24 game hours translates to 4 real life hours, then before you go out on a big expedition where you're going to be killing a bunch of NPCs and, doing a dungeon dive or something like that, you're going to make potions for you, for consumable use. But can you then turn around and put them in a shop and have people buy them? Maybe, but, unless they get bought and used right away, they're going to expire, right? But if they last a whole month, then you can put them on a shop, sell them, people can buy them, use them. Now all of a sudden it's no longer a personal resource, but it's a resource that can be distributed and sold as profit. And then from there, you just simply make it so that any individual player can only have as many as 5 NPCs. And when they get to, and maybe they can only have as many as 100 or 50 building tiles, right? So when you're a solo player, you can maybe build a teeny little house out in the open world, but that's all it's good for. But then when you get together with a guild, maybe at 10 people you can form a guild, and the guild has a multiplicative effect where not only can they pool their tiles to build a more sophisticated village, a more sophisticated settlement, right? But they could also hypothetically multiply that to where they can build much bigger one because they're a guild, right? So the guild itself would have a tile build limit aside from the individual. And then from there, every NPC you recruit, they're going to need to be fed. They're going to need water. They're going to need wood so that, at night they can burn it so that they don't get cold, whatever. And the more NPCs they have, yes, you could send those NPCs out to farm resources, but hypothetically they're only going to do one resource at a time, and, maybe if you have one NPC at every single resource, it balances out, but you're not really going to be able to grow perpetually unless you individually are funneling stuff into it. And then, of course, people can always kill your NPCs. They can steal your shit. a form of guerrilla warfare. If I want a game where it's more difficult to break something than it is to build it, but at the same time, guerrilla tactics might make sense. You might be able to sneak your way into somebody's base by picking an opening, like right there, and coming into it, and then you find a way into their house by, maybe waiting next to them for them to open up a door and running inside, or just being able to put a hole in a single tile, even though you can't destroy their whole base, right? Oh, by the way, fall damage, it's the real deal in this game. So you can break in there and maybe you rob their food supplies, and because you rob their food supplies, now their NPCs are beginning to starve, and they're going to have to scramble to get more food. It's not going to be instant, but maybe it takes a day for an NPC to go from full health to starving and ready to mutiny and abandon your guild, right? So if somebody came in and robbed your resources, like, yeah, you could easily go in and refill them before any real damage is done. But if they keep consistently doing it and then they, kind of demoralize you to where you stop going out and getting it, eventually they kill all your NPCs, and then all of a sudden all your defenders for your settlement are gone. And then they can bring in the Legion to wipe you out. It's just the idea of having all of those different tactics, and if every single tree, every plant, every bush, every animal in this game breeds, and that's how they repopulate, well, maybe you could grab some frogs from down here in the swamp and load them up into a wagon and take them up into the mountains where there's wolves and foxes and lots of things that have fur, right? Which is a unique resource. You release the frogs into the wild, and then all the wolves and foxes and stuff eat the frogs and die of poison, and you basically just deprived them of their hunting resource, right? And you can, of course, have fail-safes in the game, too, where if somebody completely wiped out some foxes to the point where they no longer existed, then, maybe periodically you have an event trigger where it says, a herd of foxes arrived from afar. And, so you can have a way for them to spawn in, but it's not the normal, regular mechanic. It's more of a fail-safe to prevent extinction. So that would be my perfect game. Be kind of a hybrid between Myth of Empires and Mortal Online 2. But Mortal's already pretty damn close, It's got almost everything that Myth of Empires does, minus the NPCs that you can control. But other than that, and the open world building, it's not tile by tile, so that's another difference as well. It's really more buying a housing plot and putting the whole plot in. But it's also a fully blown MMO on a super server that has 100,000 players. This game is broken down into channels that have like 100 player cap in each channel. Why do they do that? Because individual tile building in a game where every single tile in the game has its own health bar and can be destroyed, that is a lot of data, that is a lot of objects for a server to keep track of. And really, if you had that kind of building in a server that had 100,000 players in it, I don't know of a server powerful enough in the world that could handle that. At least not yet. Maybe in the next 10, 15 years we'll get to see games like that. But for the most part, tile-based building does not exist in MMOs. It only exists in games that have a server cap, and the biggest cap I've ever seen in a game like that is probably no more than like 100, 150 people. But someday, which, going back to my whole hybrid game idea, if you gave every person a build limit where they only get 50 tiles and that's it, that would help mitigate that to some degree. Because then you won't have, jerk-offs like me that build a giant-ass castle that is so big that it's more space than you would need to, fit every workbench in the game and have a whole guild full of people living there, and yet it's just me. Obviously you would need to prevent that in a fully blown MMO. And I think a tile limit's a good way to do it. You give somebody a 50 tile limit and there you go. If they build a 5x5 house, that's 25 tiles for the floor, 25 tiles for the roof, and that's not even enough tiles. So there you go. The biggest house you could probably build would be a 4x4. which is fine. You know, for a single player, it's enough to give you a bed, give you a chest, and give you a couple workbenches. Like, what, do you want everything? Are you spoiled? No, if you're going to be a solo player, then you're going to have access to solo player level resources. How many people live like a hermit out in the mountains and yet had a forge, a blacksmith, a kiln, a loom, a tannery, and all of that in a giant ash mansion house? It didn't exist. If you were going to live as a hermit in the frontier, you would probably have something to cook food with, maybe something to tan hides with, you know, something to process one individual resource, probably food and or armor related, and that would be it. And if you wanted access to the luxuries of all of the amenities that have been invented technologically in a society, well, then you have to live in that society. You can't have it all yourself. It's never been that way in all of human history, and it shouldn't be in a game. But anyway, yeah, so this is Mo. I was mainly just doing this stream because I wanted to sync up all of my menu controls and stuff for this so that in case the lawsuit goes well, maybe we'll be back to playing this game in the future. In the meantime, you know, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to build my following so that I can start showing up in searches and doing this streaming more seriously. So, you know, anybody who happens to be watching this live or watches this later, definitely appreciate it. If you subscribe to me on Twitch and YouTube, and of course on Twitch, if you happen to have Amazon Prime, give me those free Bezos bucks, alright? If you ain't using them, you might as well give them to me. Who else do you know?